There's a certain feeling you get when you've always been the one who takes a back seat in the family, isn't there? The kind of feeling where you're the invisible one, even though you're just as much a part of the picture as everyone else. But you stay quiet, hoping things will change, or at the very least, that they'll see you someday. The thing is, when you've been ignored long enough, you start to question whether they even care. That's exactly how I felt growing up. I was the one who'd show up year after year at every family gathering, always making the effort to be there, always offering help when needed. But none of that mattered. They didn't see me. And that's when I realized they never intended to. I didn't expect much from my family, just the basics, a little acknowledgement, some respect. But what I didn't expect was to be completely cut out when it mattered most. I'd always known there were favorites in our family, but I never thought I'd be at the bottom of the list. I assumed that, one day, things would turn around, that maybe my efforts would be recognized. But they weren't, not in the way I had hoped. It all started the day I received a call from my lawyer. "You're not in the will," he said. I thought he must have made a mistake. It had to be a mistake. I mean, I was family. Sure, I wasn't the first choice for a Sunday afternoon cookout, but I figured I had earned my place, especially when it came to the big stuff. Apparently, I was wrong. My relatives, my own flesh and blood, had left me out of the will entirely. My name wasn't even mentioned. That sting cut deeper than I anticipated. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about that at all. It was the fact that after everything I had done, after all the years I'd sacrificed for them, they didn't think I was worth a single mention. I had always been the one who quietly did the heavy lifting, while everyone else got the glory. But now, with that one phone call, I realized just how little I mattered. That moment, it broke me in ways I hadn't expected. I was angry, but more than that, I was done being invisible. This time, I wasn't going to stand by and let them get away with it. The worst part? They thought they had won. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't going to just roll over. I had a plan, something they'd never see coming. Looking back, it's easy to see where things went wrong, but at the time, I didn't know any better. When you grow up in a family where everything is about appearances, it's hard not to get lost in the noise. My family always made sure to present the picture-perfect life to the world, especially my parents. They were the kind of couple that looked great on paper, successful, well-respected, admired by friends, neighbors, and colleagues. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. My dad, a businessman through and through, was always focused on his work. He'd come home late, and by then, I'd already be tucked into bed. The few moments we did share were brief and mostly revolved around him telling me how much I could accomplish if I just put my mind to it, if I could be more like my older brother, Ryan. Ryan was the golden child, always the first to be praised, always the one getting the special treatment. He was the one who excelled in sports, the one who was charming and outgoing. Me? I was quieter, more introverted. I'd spend my time reading or working on personal projects, while the rest of the family went out for trips and events. I didn't mind it at first. I figured I wasn't as outgoing as them, so it made sense. But it wasn't just about being the quiet one. No, it was more than that. It was about being dismissed, ignored. I became the invisible sibling, the one whose achievements went unnoticed. Ryan would get all the praise for anything and everything, while I was left to quietly accept the leftover crumbs of attention. And then there was Mom. She was the social one, the one who loved hosting parties and gatherings, making sure everyone in the neighborhood knew just how wonderful our family was. But even she had her favorites. Ryan, of course, was her pride and joy. I always felt like I was competing for scraps, just trying to gain her approval, even though I wasn't the one she was focused on. It wasn't that she didn't love me, she did, but it was clear that Ryan was always first in line. When my dad passed away, things got worse. You'd think it would have brought the family closer, but it did the exact opposite. The loss hit me hard, but what really stung was the way my family handled it. Ryan, who had been so busy with his own life, suddenly became the center of attention. He was the one who took charge of the funeral arrangements, the one who handled everything while I quietly supported from the sidelines, feeling more like a helper than a daughter. And don't get me wrong, Ryan had his strengths, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the moment my father passed, I had been replaced. As time went on, things only got worse. The resentment started to build up inside me, but I didn't know how to express it. Every conversation seemed to circle back to how great Ryan was doing, how he had the charisma, the drive, the leadership that made him the perfect successor to our dad's business. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the scraps of what was left behind. The tipping point came when my mom decided to sell our family home. Without consulting me, she informed me one day that the house was going to be sold, as Ryan was now going to take over the family estate. It was as if I didn't even exist in their plans anymore. I fought to be included, to be a part of the decisions, but it was all for nothing. They didn't care. I wasn't part of the equation. And that's when I had my breaking point. That day, when I was officially told that I had been written out of the will, I realized just how deep the betrayal went. I had always thought that, at the very least, I would get something in the end, some acknowledgement that I had been there, that I had contributed. But no, it was clear now. I wasn't family to them. I was nothing more than a bystander in a game I never wanted to play. But here's the thing, I wasn't just going to roll over and accept it. That night, I made a decision that changed everything. I wasn't going to be the invisible one anymore. I wasn't going to let them steal everything from me and walk away unscathed. I was going to build something they couldn't ignore, something they'd regret underestimating. Once I made up my mind, there was no turning back. I had spent years being overlooked, but this time would be different. If they thought they could just take everything from me without a second thought, they were in for a rude awakening. I had a plan, and I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. I started by quietly observing. At first, I just watched from the sidelines, listening, paying attention to details that most people overlooked. The more I watched, the more I realized that my family's arrogance had blinded them to the fact that they'd left me with an opportunity. They didn't think I could stand up for myself. They didn't think I had the guts to fight back. But they were wrong. I knew I needed to gather information. So, I started looking into things that could give me the leverage I needed. My first stop was the family business. My dad had built it from the ground up, and despite all the attention Ryan was getting, I knew there were some things he had overlooked. There were financial records, hidden details, and connections that hadn't been fully explored. I began sneaking around, asking questions, making casual conversation with the employees, and soon enough, I had pieces of the puzzle that no one else even realized were missing. But it wasn't just about the business. It was about more than that. I needed to hit them where it would hurt the most. Their pride. The family estate, the one that Ryan had taken over so confidently, held a secret that no one else knew about. It was more than just a house. It was a legacy. And I knew exactly how to make sure that legacy would be mine. One evening, I overheard a conversation between my mom and Ryan. They were in the living room, talking about the plans for the family estate. "We'll make sure everything stays in the family," Ryan said, his voice full of confidence. "It's only right. Dad would have wanted me to carry this on." My mom agreed, her voice dripping with pride. "You're exactly what this family needs," she said. "Everything is set for you. I don't know what I'd do without you." I stayed quiet, my heart racing as I listened to their words. They thought they had it all figured out, didn't they? Ryan was the perfect choice, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. But the more I listened, the more I realized just how fragile their plan was. They were so confident in their own success that they never once considered that someone else might be waiting in the wings, quietly building a strategy they could never anticipate. The next step was critical. I needed to make sure I wasn't just another face in the crowd, another person hoping for scraps. I couldn't just wait for an opportunity to come my way. I needed to create one. So, I began working in the background, studying the family's finances, gathering documents, and looking for legal loopholes. The more I dug, the more I uncovered financial mismanagement, hidden assets, and family secrets that would shake them to their core. I knew I had them right where I wanted them. They were too comfortable, too assured that everything was falling into place just as they wanted. They underestimated me, but I was prepared. I wasn't just going to expose them for their greed, I was going to destroy their carefully constructed world, piece by piece. It would take time, but I was willing to be patient. After all, I had spent my entire life waiting. This time, I wouldn't make the mistake of rushing in. I started taking action in small, quiet ways. I made sure the right people knew about my discoveries, people who could influence the course of events without anyone suspecting me. At the same time, I kept up the appearance of being the same old me, the quiet one, the overlooked one. No one knew what I was truly capable of. As weeks passed, things began to fall into place. I knew the time was coming. The family was gearing up for another big celebration, something I'd been excluded from, of course. But that didn't matter anymore. I wasn't concerned about being left out. I wasn't concerned with being ignored or overlooked. What I was concerned with was making sure that when the time came, they would have no choice but to pay attention to me. The tension was building, and I could feel it. I was getting closer, step by step, to the moment when everything would change. They had no idea what was coming, and I was enjoying every minute of it. The day finally arrived. I had spent months building up to this moment, and now it was time to execute my plan. I had been patient, biding my time while everyone else thought they had the upper hand. But the truth was, they were walking into a trap they hadn't even seen coming. It started with the annual family gathering. This year, it was going to be at the family estate, the very one Ryan had taken control of, the one that had been passed down from generation to generation. Of course, I wasn't invited, but that was part of my plan. I didn't need an invitation. I knew exactly how to make my presence known. I had spent weeks preparing. While everyone else was focused on the party and the festivities, I was making sure all my pieces were in place. I had secured the documents, the evidence, the information that would bring their world crashing down, the financial records, the hidden assets, and the secrets that no one else had ever bothered to look for. I had it all, but there was one last detail that would make sure they understood the true scope of what was happening. I wasn't going to just expose them quietly. Oh no, that wouldn't be enough. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their betrayal, right in front of everyone they had worked so hard to impress. So, I arranged for a very special guest to attend the gathering. A private investigator, someone who knew how to get the truth out in the most dramatic way possible. With all the evidence in hand, I made sure the right people were in place to make the announcement. It was during dessert, when everyone was relaxed, sipping wine and chatting about their latest successes, that I made my move. The moment was perfect. Everyone was distracted, complacent, convinced that everything was going according to plan. Ryan was holding court, as usual, boasting about how he had everything under control, how the family business was thriving under his leadership. That's when I stood up. The room fell silent as I walked to the center of the room, my eyes locking onto my mom and Ryan. They exchanged nervous glances, but it was too late. The private investigator stepped forward, holding a stack of documents in his hand. The tension in the room was palpable as he addressed the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but filled with authority. "I'm afraid there's something you all need to see." With that, he laid out the financial records, the hidden assets, and the evidence of mismanagement and fraud. I watched as the color drained from Ryan's face. My mom's hand trembled as she clutched the edge of the table, unable to speak. The guests, who had been eagerly listening to Ryan's stories of success, were now looking at him with confusion, then disbelief. I could see the realization hit them, one by one. They'd all been duped. Ryan had been playing them, spinning a web of lies to protect his own interests. He had made sure to keep the family estate for himself, mismanaging the business, and hiding funds in offshore accounts that no one knew about. But now, it was all out in the open. The people Ryan had carefully surrounded himself with, the ones he thought he had under his control, were now turning on him. "You thought you had it all figured out," I said, my voice cool and measured. "You thought I would just sit quietly and watch while you took everything. But I wasn't the one being left out of the will, was I? I was just biding my time, waiting for the moment when I could show you all what you've been hiding." Ryan tried to stammer out some excuse, but the damage had already been done. The truth was out. He had no more allies left in the room. His arrogance, his sense of superiority, his complete disregard for me, it had all backfired. I had exposed him for what he truly was: a liar, a manipulator, and someone who didn't care about anyone but himself. As the guests began to murmur among themselves, Ryan's confidence crumbled. He tried to salvage the situation, but it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable, and he had no way to deny it. His whole world, the business, the family estate, the legacy he had tried to claim as his own, was falling apart around him. And the worst part? He knew he had lost everything. I stood there, watching as the consequences of his actions unfolded before him. His pride, his carefully constructed empire, all crumbled in a matter of minutes. There was no running from it now. He couldn't plead his way out of this one. As the room emptied, with most of the guests leaving in stunned silence, I turned to my mum. She was standing there, looking defeated. There was no denying the shame in her eyes, the weight of her own role in this betrayal. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel sorry for Ryan either. What they had done, what they had taken from me, was unforgivable. But now, I had the upper hand. I had built something they couldn't destroy, something they could never take away. I was in control now. The days after the family gathering were nothing short of chaos. My family had been left in ruins, their perfect world shattered in a single moment. Ryan, the golden boy, was now on the defensive, scrambling to explain himself. The people who had once praised him now turned their backs, unwilling to associate with someone whose lies had been exposed so publicly. It was like watching a house of cards collapse, one by one. But as for me, I stood tall. Finally, I was no longer the invisible one. I had built something from the ground up, a legacy they couldn't ignore. I had not only taken back my dignity, but I had taken control of my own future. The financial records, the secrets I had uncovered, had given me the leverage I needed to secure my place in the family's history, whether they liked it or not. Ryan's fall from grace was swift. He was ousted from the family business, his position taken away with immediate effect. The board of directors, once loyal to him, turned their attention to me. They saw the truth in my actions, the integrity I had shown by exposing his corruption, and they recognized the potential I brought to the table. Within weeks, I had secured a position at the helm of the business, a position Ryan had assumed would always be his. He tried to fight it, of course, but the damage was done. He had no supporters left. His credibility was gone, and his influence crumbled. And my mum? Well, she didn't fare much better. She had always been the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, supporting Ryan's actions while pretending to care for me. But when everything came to light, she was left with nothing. No family, no business, and no way to protect the empire Ryan had built with her help. She was forced to step down from her role in the family's affairs, and the once proud matriarch of our family was left with nothing but regret. The aftermath wasn't easy for me. There were sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and a lingering sense of loss. But as time passed, the bitterness began to fade. I realized that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to be part of their world to succeed. I had built my own legacy, one they couldn't tear down. Ryan tried to make one last-ditch attempt to fix things. He called me, begging for a second chance, pleading for me to forgive him. "We're family," he said, his voice breaking. "I never meant for things to go this far. I was just trying to protect the family." I listened to him for a moment, but there was no empathy in me anymore. "It's too late," I said. "You've made your choices. Now you'll live with the consequences." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. It was over. The last shred of my past had been severed. The family that had once treated me like an outsider was now irrelevant to me. I was in control of my own future. Months passed, and I continued to rise. My leadership of the business was transformative. The employees who had been loyal to Ryan now respected me, and the family name was no longer a symbol of arrogance and deceit. It was a symbol of resilience, of someone who refused to be silenced. As for Ryan and my mum, they faded into the background, living with the consequences of their actions. Ryan never regained his former status, and my mum was left to reflect on the choices she had made. I heard rumors that she was trying to get back into the family's good graces, but it was all in vain. The damage was irreparable. And me? I was living my life on my terms, no longer shackled by the expectations of others. I had built my own legacy, and I was finally at peace with the fact that I didn't need anyone's approval to succeed. In the end, they thought they could take everything from me. But they didn't realize something important. I never needed their approval to succeed. And now, it was my turn to show them how it felt to lose everything.